with Jetpack Compose, we're saying there's going to be more adoption now that it's stable because the risk is lower.
We're going to be emboldened to be a lot more creative with our UI.
And the most exciting thing is the way that Compose will modernize the way that we build UI.
The growth and modernization of the ecosystem and seeing that the way we do things can change and improve.
You don't have to rewrite any part of your app to adopt Compose. You can just start right now with a new screen, or you can start right now by converting an old screen.
So Jetpack Compose is essentially a new UI toolkit for Android. So for the entire 10-year history of the Android platform, we've been building our UI with the view system that comes built into the platform. And Compose is essentially a complete rewrite of that, all in Kotlin, with a pretty neat compiler running it under the hood.
Another important thing to note is that unlike the view system, which was tied to yearly Android OS version updates, Compose is completely separate from that. So like with the old system, if there's a new API added, most developers didn't really get a chance to use it for a few years until there was a good percentage of adoption of the OS version that came in. And with Compose, you can update the version completely separately without losing user coverage on the OS versions.
Yeah, I do really go back to like when Kotlin support was announced in 2017. Like that was a big surprise actually to a lot of people. Compose is less of a surprise because they've been developing it in the open for the last couple of years. But it's definitely comparable in terms of it's going to be a major shift in how we build Android apps. The API style of Compose is very different. So it's built in what's called a declarative style, where you kind of write what you want your UI to look like, and the system under the hood deals with what are the changes that it has to do to get you there. So there's much less kind of manual work that you have to do to kind of make things consistent when you're trying to change state in your UI. It's all written in Kotlin and Kotlin first. So you're no longer dealing with like XML that you were dealing with in the past. Everything's in code. You can kind of reason about it a lot more simply. You can add little bits of logic where you need to make changes. There's kind of less extra thinking you have to do to make your UI work compared to other parts of your code.
In terms of like less thinking and what you have to do to work, I think Compose is going to be a really good change in the Android ecosystem for new developers. I know a lot of like experienced devs are going through that somewhat difficult transition to change their mindset to work with Compose, because it's a kind of different way of thinking when you're building UIs. But I think, at least in my opinion, it seems like it's a lot more intuitive for someone who's a new developer coming in, because you, like Russell said, don't have to think about all of the changes that need to go on under the hood. You just kind of describe what your UI looks like for a given state, and everything else is handled for you.
I'm really excited about all the capabilities of modifying. Like in the old view system, if you want to have a button, then that button just extends button, which extends text view. So you have this deep kind of hierarchy of views. But if you want to add an image to that button, then you have to extend material button, which extends image view. So is it an image? Is it a button? Yeah, you don't know, because it's sort of this weird kind of inheritance way of looking at things. But with Compose, you can just put arbitrary content in a button or whatever. So you don't have to worry about whether it's an image or if it's a button, or it's material. You just put what you want inside that button. You can also do things that you couldn't really do before. So like drop-down menus could only accept text in the Android view system. I believe it was called a spinner. But with Compose, you can have arbitrary items in there. So you could have actually for each item set up just text and have a text view there. You could have a nested dropdown where each item is also a composable dropdown menu. So it opens up these new possibilities that you really couldn't do very easily in the Android view system. And it also has a rich animation API too. So if you're not spending, all your time learning design and learning the Android animation APIs, just a couple lines, you can animate, say, an image just fading or filling in, or something bouncing around really easily without having to pull down all sorts of resources. So I think that's super exciting. Yeah, that's why I'm excited about it.
Definitely works well when you have an architecture that's kind of focused on being reactive. So if you're doing MVVM or MVI, if you have something that you can, like, got a layer, you want a layer, if your UI can kind of observe that and subscribe to updates, Compose is kind of built to work that way.
Yeah, it's really interesting because Compose uses this thing called state, and it's just this class, and so composable functions can take state as a parameter, these composable functions, and it'll just automatically update when that state is updated. But it can also take any just sort of normal parameters that are derived by state. So if there's if you get those, say, like a Boolean that you get by a state delegate, then anytime it's updated, it will also update. And transforming from your normal world of flow and state flow, you can easily just turn those into state by just, say, collect as state, or if live data, observe a state, and boom, you're in Compose land. Really, really easy. So none of your architecture really needs to change.
It's going to be interesting to see, kind of, as more and more people start to adopt it, like how we learn to kind of build our mental model of what state is and how it changes, and what the different patterns you have to use with it are. It's kind of like the big new concept that we're working with now.
More and more people adopting it is what I'm getting most excited about, because like we saw when Kotlin was announced as the way to build Android apps, now with Compose being stable, there is going to be much more adoption, more people talking about it, more businesses wanting to put that into production. So that's where I see the excitement from a non-technical perspective.
So one of the things that the Compose team kind of built in, I think, in a pretty good way, is it's very easy to kind of move between Compose and the existing view system. So there's lots of opportunities if you're a large company with a big existing app, you can kind of migrate incrementally. And that's another spot where I kind of draw the analogy to when Kotlin was introduced as a language, where one of the really big selling points was that you don't need to kind of, it's not an all or nothing thing. You can kind of go class by class or bit by bit, adding it, without needing to throw away what you already have. And that's super important for getting adoption, when you have these big teams that have these big existing apps that they don't want to throw it all away.
I remember Pete Doyle from Amazon, he posted on Twitter a while back about launching an Amazon Care screen. I believe that's in the Alexa app, or maybe it's in its own particular app, but just launching one screen in Compose. So if you want to get your feet wet, that's a good way to do it. Also, he had another time, he had said that they brought in someone new who didn't actually have any mobile dev experience, and so they pushed their first screen with Compose. So that'll tell you just like how intuitive it is, and also the confidence that people had even before this did go stable. So it's pretty exciting.
So I think the current advice coming from Google mostly is the best way to start adoption is by doing new screens in Compose, just to kind of get your feet wet. Maybe like a side screen or something like that doesn't get too much traffic, just so you can get a feel for the framework without majorly affecting users. In a lot of ways, it's similar to recommendations on adopting Kotlin in your project, where the interop is pretty complete and there's not really much you have to do to tie your old views to new Compose code. So even if you have some custom view classes in your existing app, it's not too challenging to integrate those into a new Compose screen without having to rewrite everything. So just like with Kotlin, you don't have to rewrite any part of your app to adopt Compose. You can just start right now with a new screen, or you can start right now by converting an old screen to Compose without really affecting the rest of your app.
That's really interesting. Because 4 years ago, we did have lots of clients who were migrating from Java to Kotlin, and they would give us numbers of we're 20% Kotlin, we're 80% Kotlin, what their ambitions were. And I imagine that's going to be happening with Compose too. And when they were adopting Kotlin, there were reasons to, not just because it's the new thing.
I think it's going to be about just like making it easier to reason about how your screen works, how it changes when the user is interacting with it, and just like making it simpler to write all of that code. Like I think teams are going to find it's a better way to build their UI, and so they're going to want to start using it.
Good point of Compose is how much easier and like faster it seems to be to build UI. So especially for like larger companies, when the end goal isn't going to be any different, you're probably going to be handed a link to a Figma or something like that from your designer. They don't care what framework you're using at all. They just want it to look exactly like they told you it should look. But when you start trying those things in Compose and realizing that getting these streams thrown together in a matter of hours or days instead of weeks or more, you're really going to start seeing the benefits of making the switch.
I think if you're a designer too, and you want things to be just so, it's really nice, to be able to have that. If you say you make a card view, like you'd have in normal Android material design, and say you want just a little cut off of a corner of the bottom right corner of the card, you don't have to do any special like vector drawable or some magic to make that happen. You can just add a modifier on that corner and boom, your design is done. So when you want to make really, really pretty and very particular types of UI without spending all day on it, Compose is going to be a really great tool.
Yeah, and I think maybe an interesting way to talk about what Brady is describing is there's been a chance for kind of the Android team to because they're kind of doing a whole rewrite of the view system, they're able to kind of walk back some of the API decisions that made things harder to do historically. And they're able to kind of take all the lessons that they've learned over the last 10 years and apply it to the design of this new API that ends up being easier to use. So it's like faster to build with, and you can do more things. I think when you're a large enterprise, there's always just this like extra bit of confidence that comes with something being called stable. Like what it means technically is generally that it's not going to kind of change underneath you in a breaking way. So you can trust that like if you introduce some Compose code into your code base, it's going to remain compatible as the framework evolves. Often, even when things aren't perfectly stable, it's possible to deal with that. Like when an update happens, you have to make some changes in your app, and a smaller team is usually more comfortable with that than a larger team, with the risk of like, is that going to slow us down? Knowing that, that you have those stability guarantees, knowing that that it's kind of reached this milestone where it has that level of support is a good kind of confidence booster to get people to be ready to adopt it.
You need to use Kotlin 1.5.10 right now for the time being to use Compose. So you can't go on to 1.520 or the 1.530 preview. But yeah, 1.5.10 is super modern. And with the release of Compose to stable, it also means that you can have the full Compose tooling in Android Studio from the stable channel. So you don't have to be maintaining a canary version of Android Studio and then a stable one. You can just go full on stable from now on, which is going to be really, really nice for reliability and in making sure everyone has access to the same tools.
Yeah, that's a really good point that we haven't gone into much is like Compose is not just like the code that you're writing, but there's also a lot of nice stuff in the IDE around it. Like I've never really been a big fan of kind of like the IDE preview kind of like graphical UI builder kind of stuff, but Compose has a really nice preview engine. It makes that kind of cycle of make a change and kind of see what it looks like go a lot quicker, which is nice.
It's pretty incredible. On the right-hand panel, you can just see things previewing as you update them, as you put the app preview there. And you can see them in dark mode or light mode. You can have different screens, sizes. You can do foldables. You can add a system overlay too to see what it actually looks like on a phone. So yeah, it's very powerful, especially the live literals tool too. I mean, what really makes Compose shine, part of what makes it shine is the tooling too. Also, added the capability of doing layout inspector for composable UI as well, which is really helpful.
Yeah, I think moving all of the Compose tooling into the main release branch of Android Studio is really going to help with adoption, because that was probably one of the things holding some teams back, where if you wanted to do Compose, not only did the person working on it have to install Android Studio Canary and set it up with all their settings, and I'm sure most people have their vast array of changes that they've made that they've forgotten about, but also anyone who wanted to run the app after that would also need to do that. So it would kind of force your entire team to transition to a somewhat unstable version of their IDE, which I'm sure a lot of larger teams are reluctant to do, because when it's 2 people, it's a lot easier than when it's tens or dozens of people who have to make that change. So now that all of the tooling that is needed to effectively build Compose and develop it is in the main branch, I think that'll really speed up adoption. Yeah, so Justin actually dredged up an old article from a Reddit trend where people were building the most abhorrent, difficult to use volume slider UIs that they could, and threw out the recommendations that someone could try implementing some of those in Compose. I kind of use that to really dive deep into understanding the framework. I had done a little bit of Compose stuff before, but nothing beyond the basic list views and things like that. And overall, I mean, it was a super enjoyable and simple experience. There's a lot of things that I saw in some of those examples that don't feel confident that I'd be able to do at least very quickly without taking a few days to learn something in the traditional view system. Whereas in Compose, not only is it a brand new thing that I haven't done before, but on top of learning the framework itself, I learned the tools and skills I needed to implement these things that are a bit more complicated, all in the course of a couple of days, which really shows how much more straightforward and efficient the process of developing Compose UIs is.
I'm really happy you did that. I want people to have fun with what we're making, and with Compose you definitely can have fun. It was just an accident that somewhere in my Twitter feed one of these bad volume controls showed up, and I was just like, hey, let's do this in Compose. And thanks, Michael, for jumping on that.
It was a great time. I really enjoyed it. I kind of ran away with it a couple of days and just oh, well, what if I did this? This is even worse. And really ended up with some horrendous UIs that, I mean, the code that wrote them is clean. And, I think an intentionally bad UI is as difficult to write as a really good UI.
Yeah, I really like it too, as it's sort of what you were saying, that it's about how it's much easier to do that sort of thing in Compose than in the traditional UI framework. But it's a really neat example because it's user interaction based, and it's sort of animation-y. It's all these things that we often avoid in our first pass at things in the traditional system, because it's just kind of a bunch of extra overhead. And now it's gotten a lot easier to do, which is really cool.
I started playing around with it, just doing some image transformations and just kind of having fun with that, because we have Accompanist, which is great. Allows you to use Coil and Compose images. But what I really liked was just making a simple D&D spell app with it's just like a normal phone app or whatever, but you have a list of these things, and instead of doing master detail, which you usually do for Android, I was thinking, what if I just make it expandable? So you click on it and then it'll just show your entire, all the details of it. You can collapse it again. And then you don't have to have that jarring kind of flash from one to the other. And that was really cool, because the animation APIs let you let that just happen just effortlessly. So yeah, I really liked that, and I think it's going to change how I think about master detail and navigation and animations.
So one of the things that we always kind of say is one of the big benefits of KMM is the modularity of it. So like compared to other ways of doing cross-platform mobile, Kotlin doesn't make it any more difficult to drop down into native and use any kind of new existing native tools. So it's a neat example of seeing like there's this like brand new thing that's going to transform the Android ecosystem, and we can kind of adopt it right away without needing to change anything else about the way that we're doing our KMM setup.
Yeah, that optionality and modularity. Risks are bad, but taking risks are not always bad. You need to be deliberate and make the right choices around those risks to move forward in anything that you're doing. So with Jetpack Compose, we're saying there's going to be more adoption now that it's stable because the risk is lower. With KMM, you can take parts of your app and try out KMM. And it used to be more experimental than it is now. So the risks continue to be lower and the nature of it is lower. Just like with Jetpack Compose, there's optionality, just try it on one screen. The risk is lower. So you can make those decisions. You're not going to break your company and your product by trying these things out now. And I think with Jetpack Compose being version 1, we've seen Jetpack Compose on web and on desktop already, utilizing the fact that Kotlin is a multi-platform language. And with the stability around Jetpack Compose, it just opens up more doors for people to try it out on different platforms.
I really, I'm just really impressed with the new compiler. That's what really makes KMM and Compose possible. Is this new IR backend? So the intermediate representation of your code. It will, the compiler is going to parse it, and then it's going to put it into this abstract syntax tree. And from there, that is where the Compose compiler now is going to go in there and rewrite those functions with these with a couple extra parameters in them, and then it'll make the state management and drawing on the screen possible. Now, when Compose was first being developed, this wasn't there, and so they had to do some really difficult things to rewrite the bytecode. But now, Compose functions. It looks like an annotation processor, but it doesn't generate code; it rewrites it. What's really cool is that you don't have to be really deep in the weeds if you want to write a compiler plugin just like that. You can plug into the IR compiler plugins are not easy. They're not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but they're also not as hard as it used to be either. That's kind of like what made Kotlin multi-platform possible. It used to be that your Kotlin would compile directly to JVM, and they would compile directly to native, and that would take a longer time. But now once it gets into the intermediate representation, now we can deploy it to JVM, and we can deploy it to JS and compile that to native as well for iOS and other platforms. So I'm just really excited about what the development of this IR and the FIR coming up is going to make possible. It's going to make like a huge dent in meta programming. I think it's going to be a really cool time.
Yeah, I just want to make one small correction, which is native actually was always building to IR. Like that was where they were first prototyping it. But yeah, only in the most recent Kotlin version does the JVM use it by default. And yeah, like it's going to still be a long road getting there, but there's definitely some really neat multi-platform use cases that will start to open up more and more as Compose for desktop and Compose for web and Compose for whatever else starts to develop.
It goes back to our parallels with Kotlin as a language. People were using Kotlin in production before Google said this is now the official language on Android. And that was also important to people as they're watching, should we adopt this now? If not many people were using it in production already and it became 1.0, there'd still be a lot of risk around it. Okay, this means it's probably not going away. This means it's probably, we're not going to need to rework a lot of stuff since it's stable. But if nobody's really using it, you don't have that confidence. But because people were already using it, they're already using Jetpack Compose in production. 1.0 is icing on the cake. It's showing that it's recommitting to Compose as the way forward for Android.